Northern France, 1346. A large army of French knights, long considered the most elite cavalry in Europe, descended on a wounded but determined English force. They expected an easy victory and rich ransom numbers. Instead, they faced something they hadn't fully prepared for: disciplined infantry and thousands of longbows raining death like hail. Welcome back to the series that I'm doing on the 100 Years' War. Today we're going to dive into the Battle of Crecy, a confrontation in the campaign that you would think would decide victory for one side, but it really changed how wars would be fought in Europe for generations. To understand the Battle of Crecy, we must go back a little bit. The 100 Years' War began in 1337 over competing claims to the French crown and disputes over lands such as Aquitaine. King Edward III of England felt justified in his claim to the French throne, rooted in his ancestry and long-standing feudal rights his family held on French soil. But his ambitions were far more theatrical. In 1346, he decided to invade. Between July and August of that year, Edward carried out one of the largest amphibious invasions of the Middle Ages, landing an army of roughly 14,000 men in Normandy, knights, archers, and infantry, and ravaging the countryside on the march northward. His goal was not destruction, but to force the French into a pitched battle. Philip IV of France responded, assembling what was likely the largest medieval army ever seen up to that point to stop him. On August 26, 1346, the two armies met near Crecy-on-Depontire in Burgundy. King Edward III, seasoned and calmed under pressure, along with his son Edward the Black Prince commanding the right flank, only 16 years old but already learning the harsh lessons of war. Roughly 7,000 to 15,000 soldiers, including English and Welsh archers equipped with longbows, a relatively simple weapon, but devastating when used en masse. On the French side, you had King Philip determined to crush the invasion. A host of French nobles who came wearing their best armor, so confident of victory that they had already negotiated how they would divvy up English prisoners for ransom. Among them were Charles II, Count of Alençon, Rudolph, Duke of Lorraine, and Louis II, Count of Blois. Also, King of Bohemia, an aging monarch who rode into battle blind, trusting his companions to guide him. Bohemia is a very interesting part of this entire story because Bohemia was actually part of the Holy Roman Empire. The French army far outnumbered the English. Estimates ranged from double to 4 times as many men. Looking at the battle, we see that Edward had chosen the high ground, a gently rising slope with hedges and pits in front. His men dismounted from their horses, an unusual but increasingly common medieval tactic, making them more suitable and harder to break. The key to this battle wasn't steel and horse. It was wood, yea, and rate of fire. English longbows could fire as many as 3 hours in the time it took a crossbow to load and fire once, a huge tactical advantage. When the Genoese crossbowmen, mercenaries hired by the French, advanced first, a sudden thunderstorm soaked their strings, rendering their weapons almost useless. English longbowmen, whose strings could be easily taken off and put back, let volleys fly. Their arrows fell so thick it was like snow. The way this battle unfolded is quite incredible because when you look at the numbers on paper and the experience on paper, you would think that it's an easy victory for the French to win. But this is something that we see commonly throughout this time, especially in the 100 Years' War, that numbers don't always matter. At the start of the battle, as a sudden thunderstorm broke out, it soaked the crossbows. The longbowmen of England could easily unstring and protect their strings under their hats or clothing. The Genoese couldn't. When the shooting began, one side had working weapons, the other didn't. With the Genoese thrown into chaos and breaking under English arrow fire, the French knights charged uphill into a storm of shafts and disorganized crossbowmen. What happened next was catastrophic for the French. Charging knights were slowed by mud and obstacles, Thousands of arrows fell on their horses' heads, necks, and bodies, bringing many of them down before they could reach the English lines. French cavalry after cavalry were cut down or thrown into disarray. According to some chronicles, the fighting lasted into the night with waves of French assaults, all repelled by disciplined English ranks. They picked the high ground and let French destroy itself by attacking, wave after wave, uphill into a storm of arrows. And some chronicles even say 15 plus charges failed for the French. You had many strange things happen in this battle. A great example is the King of Bohemia, John of Bohemia, who was blind. He requested to be tied to his fellow knights to charge into battle. The next morning, they were all found dead, still linked together. Something else is when the Genoese crossbowmen started to retreat after being absolutely obliterated by arrow fire. French knights started to ride them down as if they were cowards. Chaos started before the English had even time to fight the main army of France. It's also said that the English may have used small primitive cannons. And if this is true, this is one of the first times gunpowder had been used in a large-scale battle in Europe. Now, these cannons weren't the deciding factor of the battle, but psychologically terrifying for the French. Knights would hear explosions before they had even charged, and as they were charging into battle, have massive balls of iron come slamming towards them. Some historians say that the rain may have decided the battle, because the Genoese crossbowmen were highly trained, but having their crossbow strings soaked basically made them useless, and having the longbowmen of England fully ready for anything, they were able to rain arrow fire down. And something that's very interesting is you see the English not aiming for the French knights, but aiming for their horses, because the landscape that this battle had was so muddy and so confusing to everyone that if you were knocked off your horse, you were basically dead. The armor was too heavy for you to get up, or you would be trampled by the oncoming forces of your own, or the horses trying to get out of the battle. Something that we also see is King Philip of France, King Philip IV, was actually wounded in battle. At one point, he had been forced by his own men to leave the field so he wouldn't be taken prisoner. Something that we see in this battle is that the English also barely moved. They set themselves up for defense, and it worked out. And the French nobility was basically annihilated. Countless dukes, counts, and bannerments were basically just destroyed. Many were killed. Very interesting character, which we'll dive into a little later on in this series, is Edward the Black Prince. If you have seen the movie The Knight's Tale, he's actually in that movie, which is pretty cool. Edward the Black Prince of Wales, just a very cool name. He was 16 at the time of this battle, and it's reported that his father, Edward III, the one commanding the English, asked, "Is my son dead or wounded?" And when he was told no, he said, "Let the boy win his spurs." It's an absolutely legendary line from a legendary king about his legendary son. Something that's also very strange is French reinforcements arrived the next day. They thought the battle was still about to start, and when they showed up, it was too late. They found a field covered in bodies and mud. This entire battle, between how it started, what took place during it, and how it ended and the consequences after, would seem as though the English were going to win this war. That the English, after this battle, would trample over France easily. But it's never as simple as that. French casualties were heavy. Contemporary accounts vary, but thousands of knights and nobles were killed. It wasn't just a defeat for France, it was a political earthquake back home, because the King of Bohemia, King John, the blind king who rode in a battle and died with 2 knights tied to his horse. That was a huge loss for the French crown. A political ally within the Holy Roman Empire killed in battle, in the first true battle that we see in the 100 Years' War. Counts and dukes who had confidently expected ransoms, wealth, instead found themselves dead or captured. English casualties were comparatively light. So why did this battle matter? Well, it didn't end the war. It was actually one of the first major battles in a war that lasted well over a century, 116 years. But it shattered the myth that heavily armored cavalry alone could dominate European battlefields. Instead, disciplined infantry, armed with longbows, showed that strategy and technology could overcome sheer numbers and feudal prestige. After the Battle of Crecy, medieval rulers across Europe reassured how to train armies and how to structure defense and how to fight, making this battle a milestone in the evolution of warfare itself. England went on to besiege and eventually capture Calais, giving them a foothold on the continent for centuries. This battle is incredibly interesting, and when you read the history on it, it's almost terrifying when you think about a side that you would want to be on. When you look at the numbers and when you look at the stats before, you would think, oh yeah, I would love to be on the French side. They have 2 to 4 times the amount of English troops. They have some of the best armor and some of the highest ranking nobles in all of Europe, so you would want to be with them. The battle did not go in any way to help them. It absolutely shattered France. So it really does show that tactics and technology is what wins war, especially tactics. The fact that the English chose to be on the high ground and have just an insane amount of longbowmen, something that we see the English use for the next several hundred years. The longbow, even though the crossbow was more technologically advanced, and the longbow was quite primitive when you compare the two, the longbow is what won this battle for the English. And also, the rain. It's so crazy that this thunderstorm just happened right at the beginning of the battle, which really makes the cavalry charges almost useless. Charging on a horse that's heavily armored, and you are also heavily armored, so the weight is so immense, and you're charging uphill as it's pouring rain. You're just, every step forward is not even 2 steps back, it's like 10 steps back. And then you're going over other dead horses and dead knights. It's truly terrifying. But this battle was the English victory that shocked Europe, and it shook France. And King Philip IV had many things to consider. And the claim for the French crown that King Edward III had seemed more obtainable. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little dive into the Battle of Crecy. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced anything. I do not speak French, and I am not French. But this is my 2nd episode in the series that I'm doing covering the 100 Years' War. If you enjoy, please like, comment, subscribe, all the classic things. And if I missed anything, please feel free to comment and let me know. I am not a trained historian, I'm just very passionate about history. And using my own voice rather than a AI voice, I might mess up some pronunciations. So yeah. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode.